You know, if I said that we were going to go in America and look at an ancient Egyptian artifact, you'd probably think we were going to go to a museum someplace. But if I told you that it wasn't in a museum, you might start thinking of fanciful things like the Grand Canyon and its stories that go along with it, or you might think of the Washington Monument. I mean, that's the world's largest obelisk, and it was created by Masons, and it's got that Vesica Pisces all around it and everything that I talked about in that other video. But no, we're going up northeast here. Even though it does have connectives to what I just talked about, and even more. And we know that there's Masons that are hooked up with the founding of Washington, D.C. and the way that it lays out, but a lot of people don't know there are other places that make connections. This is Grand Central Station, and a lot of people might think that that artifact that I'm going to talk about could easily go right here in the center of this room. But that's not really why we're here. For if I just zoom out, this was made by the Vanderbilts. Very famous, railroading and everything off of it. Yeah. There was a time whenever railroading was the only way to get stuff and people across with any power and speed at all, until we made automobiles and individual travel, and then all the roads and things that connect all in. We still use it to this day an incredible amount, and a lot of people are taking trips on trains and so on too, but Grand Central Station used to be huffing a lot more than this at one point, but we still carry it on today, although it's looked at as, well, we carried on with that, we cars, and then we got planes. You know, now we're reaching the space age, so a modern day form of this would be some type of spaceport. Well, I kind of thought we'd be there when I was a kid, that by now we'd have something like that going on, but we're inching our way slowly that way. But not to look at it from this point of view, for a lot of people that are walking through this place never take the time to look around. And in this area, and in fact there's a lot of videos about, I'm not going to go into all the things about sacred geometry and all these different things that are laid out in this building here, but this point of view looking down is not going to do it. In fact, most of the people that are walking around would actually never look up. Let's get a different point of view here in a different picture real quick. See if I can show you. Because if we, oh, there was a real good one. You can see a little bit of it, and it's green and scribbling. Oh, it wasn't this far up, was it? There are pieces of it and everything that I could show you to get a little bit better look at it. But here we go. Across the ceiling, there's a depiction like this. And it goes from Cancer through the twins of Gemini, but then it has some other zodiacs thrown in here, but it's what the sign or the sky courses throughout the year for a portion of it. And here we have Orion the hunter, we're all familiar with, Taurus the bull, Aries, and conspicuously over his shoulder there is a wasp, which I want you to remember that, but also a triangle, and then a right squared triangle here. There's also Pisces, which is the age of Jesus, and then we just are ending here and going into Aquarius, which it doesn't quite capture in this shot. Also, it doesn't capture all of it up here, but here is Pegasus. And there's all these little gold dots all around, and even some brighter spots, which used to be done with a foilish type thing from what I understand, but then they changed it out, and certain ones were done with fiber optics, and then after they did them with fiber optics, they ended up putting LEDs in there. And they're different color tones and so on whenever you open and look at it, and you might notice that the shoulder of Orion has that purple one in it, and so on. And this was made by the Vanderbilts. And he's hooked up to something else that we're going to look at in that artifact. But just since we're going through the train station here, I thought you might look up for a minute and find something else that's shown here that all connects to this. If you haven't noticed yet, everything's backwards. Why would it be backwards? Well, some people say that it's because this is God's point of view looking down on creation, and these people are creating things and the gods of this earth. That's one esoteric viewpoint. The other one is that this was taken from scripts and ancient star maps from the 1700s, and you were meant to actually look through it through light, like on a light table, right? And that it would go on the interior of an astrolabe, and if they were transparent, you could just see right through it, and you could see through it this way and that, right? From the inside looking out at them, but then back looking at it. It's a strange representation, though, because we know some of these stars are close and some are far away and all that stuff, of course, but it would put it in a representation as a cellophane, if you will, right out there in the heavens. And so this is put in here, and you can see some of these stars, of course, and the little dots that are all around everything. And whenever you do, you don't notice it, but let me change again. I'm sorry, but again, oh, Cancer, the crab, that has a key point. In fact, this stretch of time here is a key point. This is a modern humanity coming through the flood and everything after it. And if you've been with me for a while, what we've been looking at is this age that runs through here, and we generally hang in all this area, and this Milky Way that runs through the edge of it, and the series of it that runs through here, and this Milky Point where before we don't really know the what. And of course there's Scorpio coming on and so on. But so this other depiction, sorry, but it's back down here, for I saw one that was back down here, and it showed a close-up of Orion. Because what's important about that, well, I'll tell you whenever we get here. So now if you notice, he has a couple of different stars lit up, and he has other ones that are certain sizes, and there's little ones and medium large and larger, and some are drawn different ways than their centers, and they're actually respective of the way that stars look. And if you've ever looked at an old star chart and stuff like that, you've kind of seen the representation before, and that was to make sure that you knew which one was the bright stars and this, that, and the other that made up, and you had everything going on already, right? But if you look around his head, there's thousands of stars, and I'm not sure if you could even see them from the ground. But they're a representation of, if you're way out in the middle of nowhere and looking up on here, you could actually see this. You could probably zoom in like this picture was taken, and you can get a good representation of it. But he's got a belt on here, and it's going backwards though instead of forwards. And the strange thing about this is, and Vanderbilt create this, of course, like I was saying, is that the belt is backwards. But what does it point to? Well, in reality, it points toward the stars Sirius, right? And a lot of people know the three stars are made like the pyramids of Belt of Orion. In fact, they're off by that little set. And we'll get into that in just a second. Just want you to keep that in mind. In fact, a lot of times I've explained that this Orion pose here is actually the Osiris pose, Aryan pose. It's the smiting pose, right? Past master of beasts, and are doing the same pose that makes up this constellation. And of course that hooks up to Osar, or Osiris, whose stars point to Sirius. Now that's Isis. Sirius is Isis, but it's weird, Osiris and Isis go together like a Irish word, O'Leary, Osiris, Sirius, which is Osiris, that's Isis. Let's just continue. But there's millions of stars up there, I guess is what I wanted to show with this and this depiction. But what do they point to now that everything's going backwards or whatever? Well, if you just look out that window there, there's the Statue of Liberty. It's up on a pedestal too, or an obelisk type base. But there we have something else. Yeah, isn't that unique? Well, that's not even half the thing here. It's just one of the oddities, I guess, that go on with this. For what we're really looking at here is Cleopatra's needle. And so let's see if I can get a good picture of it up here. It's pulled different ones up in different orders now. So here's Cleopatra's needle. Oddly, it doesn't have anything to do with Cleopatra, actually. And there are two of these. One of them is in London, and the other one is in New York. This is the one that's in London, and you can see where they're holding the bottom of the statue, almost like a candle holder. I forget what you call that form there. But in its own works, and even on the cartouches that's here, and it recreates it right here, that's not the cartouche of Cleopatra, even though we have the double snake symbol and everything that goes on. It's even got the horns of Khnum on top of it, and all the symbology is kept here. But that cartouche actually goes with Thutmose III. Well, Thutmose III was actually known as Men-Kau-Ra, but that's his common name. Now, the way it comes out in hieroglyphics is Jehudi Mes, which actually is ibis and a downward facing pot leaf and then a shepherd's hook. Make of that whatever you will. But that Jehudi Mes is where we get Jehudi is Thoth, and that's where we get Thoth's Moses from in the Greekified version, if you will. Not to go too deep in that, but you know, New York has a twin of this. Well, it's not really the twin. It's actually the other pillar on the other side. You see, because this pillar and the other one that I'm about to show you were the different pillars on each side of the ancient temple of Heliopolis back in Thutmose's time. And this is where all the pharaohs got their sacred knowledge and da-da-da. Yeah, so it's something that whenever you pick your obelisks, that was a pretty good choice here. So this one was taken to England, and it's got its whole story with it, and they put it in this half submarine type of craft and got it almost all the way there, and it washed out in a bad storm and went under, and I think it lost 6 people whenever it happened, but it went under in Biscayne Bay, yeah. And now, though, well, within a couple of days they were able to get it back up and then bring it on the rest of the way and stand it up. And they've got a hell of a lot of drawings of it where they're standing it up, the way it looks, and all the craft that they went through. Hopefully there'll be a picture of that coming up. Right? So these obelisks here, it's pretty important marker that they had back in the day. Now this thing is 80 foot tall. It's like 70 plus the little pedestal and everything makes it like 80 foot tall. It's got the pyramid on top of it. But let's look at Cleopatra's needle, and that's what they call it, Cleopatra's needle. Although again, it doesn't have anything to do with Cleopatra. Let's see if I can get a close-up of Cleopatra's needle, actually. This is the one that's in Central Park in New York. And it's kind of at one end of it and offset just a little bit. And here we can see that a lot of these cartouches and stuff are starting to just wash out. In fact, from what I understand, this thing set a lot of times on its side in Alexandria before it was given to us, and in like 1817, and we couldn't pick them up until like 1887 or something. And this was funded by Vanderbilt also. So here's a little connective with that. But you can imagine these rich guys were funding things all the time. Now we go back to the crab thing, because you can see that the pedestal that this is on is different than the other one, and it doesn't have that symbology and stuff. And there's a worry about this crack that's going through it, because if that wafers off 1/3 of the bottom pedestal that's holding the whole thing up, we're in trouble a little bit here. And what's holding this one right, even though the bottom is all fractured, as you can see, are actually at the four corners here, crabs. Like Cancer, you can see the pinchers in it. I'm going to zoom in here for you, and this is probably not that great of a picture, but yeah, crabs. Right? What's crabs got to do with it? Well, if you got into their ancient theology and sacred geometry and things, and also their King's List type things, it goes all the way back into the age of that. In fact, they talk about it, but modern Egyptologists don't want to pull that in, because that instantly, before they had the unification, that was just the puff of myth and mystery, right? We've gone through that a few times and figured out there's a lot more going on. That leads back to Göbekli Tepe and all types of things. We're going to find something else too. Just you wait and see. Haven't been wrong yet. So you know America's got hookups with things like this. It's on the dollar bill, and they've got a pyramid, and it's actually cut at the golden section if people don't know what that is. But then it's got the eye, or the Wadjet eye, or blue eye of Horus, there on the dollar bill staring at you. Separated, and it's told to be an unfinished work. That's because it's not finished. It goes on. Well, Egypt isn't really building any more stuff like that. No, other people are building more stuff with sacred geometry after that point, and it continues. Like Washington Monument, but here's a sign of this right here. And we've talked about these obelisks being a key point, all kinds of things, sundials, in fact, in ways that work out and inscribe on the ground actually a form that looks like an axe over time, and that's where the war axe type thing comes from. But this obelisk here is not much different than the obelisk that you find in Rome and Vatican, right there in the center point of that wheel. That looks like the zodiac. So they're connectives over and over again. And so when we think, pretty much a lot of this has been lost, there were some people here who weren't losing anything, and they were trying to keep and retain it. We now see a lot of it in museums, but isn't it incredible that this thing is just sitting out in Central Park? And here they are erecting it, and I don't know which one. Yeah, that's the one in Central Park that they're erecting there. And at the time, it was just kind of out here in the middle of nowhere. Also, Vanderbilt was with the people that picked exactly where it goes. In fact, he's probably supposed to be here in the crowd, but I don't think he's the guy calling on it, but he might be. And here they are standing it up with its brocade on the bottom of it and pivoting it in place. But you can see that it's kind of worn away here. But there's that cartouche, and again, that's Min Copper Ra. There's the sun that's with it. That's what goes with it. Oh, and that means lasting manifestation of Ra. So long live the king and all of that stuff, and he's the manifestation of Ra himself, as they called it. But you can see how it's worn out quite a bit. In fact, they just redid the one in London, and they redid the one over here too, and tried to fix it up a little bit. But so is that the only obelisk that's here in New York even? Well, no, actually it's not. There's another one. Now, strangely, this is up in Central Park, but down in the middle, leading out towards the Gulf, where Staten Island is, and there's Statue of Liberty. About midway, there ends up being another one. Now, it's inside of a churchyard, and this church is the place that George Washington went to church at. Whenever they had the ceremonies, he went to church there and stuff. This is it. And who else went to that church was Pierre L'Enfant. That was the guy that helped lay out Washington, D.C., if you'll remember. L'Enfant means the infant. But from the mind of babes. But L'Enfants, they're both Masons. Now this Emmet is what the obelisk is for in the center part there. And he's actually an Irish immigrant. Right? And you look this up, and it's got his face carved onto it, and you know it's not from Egypt. It's an obelisk just like this. I should try to switch to a picture of it, but I don't know. There's a third one too. It's for General Worth, and it's more out in the Gulf, or not the Gulf. It's down towards the end of it, Manhattan. Here we go. Now that name's important, General Worth, not only for the name of Worth, of having some worth, but other than being Fort Worth. If you've ever heard of it, Fort Worth, Texas is named for him. In fact, at one time he was the Secretary of War in Texas. He's a Major General in the Army, and that's what it shows there. Major General, and it's all hooked up, and got another obelisk that looks just like these. But on the plaque, that's what it says. What's strange about it is, if you look at it, they're offset just a little bit. And one's a little bit closer this way than that way. But the strange thing is, so is Orion's belt. In fact, it pretty much lays out just like it. And you can look at the roads and see that they knew what the hell they were doing here, just like in Washington, D.C., and laying certain ones out. There's a place known as Manhattan Henge, if you've ever heard of it. It's a solstice event where you can go, and the sun actually passes right down a set of roads, and everybody gets up on the bridges and watches it, takes pictures of it, and so on. It's kind of famous, and so it sets in between two streets. It's kind of like a Stonehenge concept. Thousands of people line up for this, right? So, again, New York was New Amsterdam, and then it became New York, and because of New England and stuff, and then there's New Jersey and New Hampshire, of course, New York, and so this was a recreation of things and put in a certain way. But Cleopatra's needle wasn't made by Cleopatra. It was made again by Thutmose III, who was one of the guys that pushed boundaries farther than anybody and so on. But it's about 1475 BC whenever the thing was created, right? And Cleopatra, by the way, was Isis. or she envisioned herself as being the recreation of Isis, and he was Osiris, right? Mark Anthony, and that's the way they played it out. In fact, people looking for that temple, which I did a video of recently, are looking for a temple of Isis because they think that they would bury her in a tomb under it instead of an outside tomb if there's anything to be found that's above ground anymore after everybody's looked so far. So we have that one in Central Park, and it's commissioned by Vanderbilt, and he actually had, instead of doing the coffin, try to pull it along, tug it behind another boat submarine idea, which didn't go over too good, but still got it there. He actually took a giant ship and had a hole in it, from what I understand, poked a hole through the front of it and got the thing in there somehow, and then actually sealed around the bulkhead around it, and with it like that, because it couldn't even fit totally in the ship, but the ship could hold its weight, and drove the thing all the way here to New York Harbor, which again, before we have planes and everything else, that's the way that things came from distant lands and so on, in a long boat from China. You've heard the expression perhaps, and so on. So we still have that going on with shipping containers and things that we have overflows of, and it just keeps supplying things. But of course, perishable items and things like that in any way get shipped, but it costs more by airplane and stuff nowadays, and we all know that. So it spent a long time in Heliopolis, and then it was in Alexandria for a long time, on its side for a bit, and then taken here. See if I can just move down to get another picture. There's a picture of some of the Egyptians. People taking pictures in front of it and so on. So this giant lift that you're seeing there in that top picture that looks like some type of siege weapon, it really is working on some of that concept, but it's used to take the extreme weight and shift it to one side and pivot it and get it in and lift things up. Much like they would have stood up Stonehenge and all these obelisks in the first place. It takes something along this concept. But so he built Grand Central Station, which has that Orion Taurus depiction on the ceiling, but it's reversed as if from God's point of view. And where it's pointing at, too, is supposed to be Sirius, but what it's pointing to actually is the Statue of Liberty. If you take these three and run them through town, and I wish I had a picture of this doing so, but from north to south running in effectively, you have them offset just a little bit, and they run out, and they're pretty much aiming way out of scale, of course, to what there is here, but that's the Statue of Liberty is there. Now that was taken in from France too, but there's a whole connection that goes with that. There's a Sphinx that you see right there on the right. Let's just zoom in on it. Now this is one that was in England, and whenever they had the bombing in World War I believe, not World War II, World War I, a bomb blew up in the street real close to where this was, and you can see the shrapnel up against of it, and so on. Didn't get hurt though. Not too much. So we have that Central Park one, the one that's Emmett, that's actually in the St. Paul's Church, one of the most ancient churches in New York too, and it's there standing in its place. And you don't tear down a church. There's all this is getting all built around, and there are churches and little pockets that are everywhere that don't get messed with. Why? Because that's sacred ground for a lot of reasons. A lot of reasons. So Freemasonry started long before 1717. Hey, I'll tell you something now that kind of goes with whenever I write down in the comments and everything. It has ... and I'm doing a pause. Quite often I use a lot of commas in there. It's because I kind of speak fast, but then I have little pauses. so we can reflect on little pieces of it. But then ... was meant to reflect back on what's been just said, like aha or whatever. But it's also to be, kind of like etc. or the thing, right? Well, if you've been watching my videos, the thing. But those three dots are said by some to be put in linguistics in the place of Orion's belt. And what does that have to do with anything with ... and speech and how it all connects? I don't know. It's just an odd connection I thought I'd throw in there. You'll see it in my speech all the time when I put it in there. What I'm doing is not putting a place that's just a comma, like what I would have right there in my speech, but then there's that whole ... which gives us a moment to reflect. Something more like that. To give you a time to kind of put it together. So, Egypt to America and Cleopatra's Needle. Cleopatra was Isis. Henry Corringe was the officiator of it, and believe it or not, the 96th Street Trestle Bridge was made just for its egress going into Central Park. You've heard of the Vanderbilts, like Gloria Vanderbilt. Yeah, this is a succession that comes from there, fashion design and so on. Maybe you've heard of Anderson Cooper, of Get Rich and fake media shill fame, Blue Eyes and stuff. Yeah, that's from that Vanderbilt family there. So pretty neat, and it's got a connection here to Fort Worth, Texas. But these pillars used to be again on the either side of the entrance of the Temple of Heliopolis, which is a sun temple. It's where the pharaohs actually used to go to learn their sacred knowledge here. So we've made quite a few connections, the Statue of Liberty and so on. And I think that's good for this one. We'll move along. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. Hey, if you got any other connections that go with that sacred geometry, layouts, New York, so on like that, or even that Grand Central Station there, well, let me know about it here. Because, whenever they took it into town, there was 9,000 Masons escorted it and set the foundation stone for it. And again, it's 80 foot tall. This was, you saw how it was, and it's a staggering, supposedly 220 tons. So it wasn't something that was small at all. In fact, when Cleopatra's Needle was found by the guy I mentioned there earlier, they were found with Masons' items inside of it. They even had the local Masons' Lodge come down and verify it and stuff, which were a trowel, a square, and a lead-weighted plumb level. And these are symbols still kept sacred to this day, and are involved with even religious items. And if you've ever seen the Masonic ring and all of its symbols and the symbology that goes along with it, and those connectives there. So it continues on. And if you were to go around New York, you could find it in a lot of places, just in architecture and stuff. And you'll see a lot of stuff that's going back, and it harkens to Roman type architecture, things like that. And of course, it'll be encompassed in those too. You'll see it utilized in a modern way. And of course, modern buildings don't play out to really show that off as much as everybody did up until just recently. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. Peace.